Sal Mineo confessed everything in the letter he left for David Cassidy. Sal Mineo was born Salvatore Mineo Jr. on January 10, 1939, in the Bronx, New York. He entered the entertainment industry at a very young age, quickly demonstrating his acting talent and receiving formal training which paved the way for him to be noticed by Broadway and Hollywood while still young. Sal Mineo grew up in an Italian immigrant family in the Bronx, poor, not only in material terms, but also in emotional security. His father was a manual laborer, his mother a seamstress, both embodying the immigrant mentality, silent, disciplined, and believing that children could only survive by not causing trouble. In that environment, Mineo early on learned to observe rather than express himself, developing a quiet sensitivity rarely seen in children. Sal was not a confident performer like many other child stars. On the contrary, he often felt anxious when standing among crowds and only felt safe when he could transform into someone else. Acting teachers noted that Mineo tended to hide behind his characters, viewing the stage as a psychological refuge rather than a place to show himself. This explains why he later excelled at playing wounded characters but was awkward in social life. Mineo also became aware early on that he differed from the other boys in his neighborhood, not only in personality, but also in his perception of the world. He had no interest in competitive violent games. Instead, he spent much of his time listening to music, taking notes, and observing other people's emotions. This difference often led to Mineo being teased, but it is worth noting that he did not resist. Instead, he accepted his role as an outsider, a position that later became his acting instinct. The Italian Catholic cultural background of Mineo's family also had a profound influence on his future. Concepts of sin, shame, and repression were instilled early on, causing him to develop a sense of internal self-censorship from his teenage years. Instead of rebelling openly, Mineo learned to suppress and transform his emotions into artistic expression, a trait evident in the perpetually sad look in his eyes on screen. Sal Mineo's childhood also lacked emotional recognition. His family supported his pursuit of the arts, but mainly because it offered an opportunity to escape poverty, not because they understood their son's inner life. This created a paradox. Mineo was put on stage very early, but was never taught how to exist as his true self when the lights went out. This absence became an underlying theme throughout Sal Mineo's life, from the roles he chose to the way he loved to the letter he later sent to David Cassidy. In that letter, Mineo did not mention fame, but rather his fear of being swallowed up by his public image, a fear that had been formed in childhood when he learned that being seen did not equate to being understood. What few people know is that Sal Mineo was not the first choice for the role of Plato. Director Nicholas Ray was looking for a face that was neither too masculine nor too childish, and Mineo was put on the list as a last-minute experiment. During the audition, he did not act according to the script, but almost whispered the lines, creating the feeling that the character was always on the defensive. It was this deviation from the norm that led Ray to choose Mineo. Mineo actively made Plato more solitary in the film. He asked to have his lines cut and requested to stand apart from the other characters in many scenes. This went against the acting conventions of the time, but Mineo believed that Plato was not someone who wanted to be heard, but someone afraid of being heard. This approach made Plato the most haunting character in the film, and also the image that would be forever associated with Mineo. This turning point not only propelled him to stardom, but also shaped Hollywood's perception of him as an emotional icon, rather than a star who could replicate his image. Studios began casting Mineo in different unstable roles, but rarely allowed him to break out of that mold. His initial success was thus also a trap. Few noticed that after Rebel Without a Cause, Mineo actively turned down many traditional leading man roles. It wasn't out of arrogance, but because he feared being forced to play a false kind of masculinity. This decision cost him points, with studios who preferred malleable actors to artists with strong opinions. Another silent consequence of this turning point was that Mineo was labeled by the media as overly sensitive. Interviews at the time show that he was often asked about his emotions, sadness, and loneliness, rather than his acting technique. This inadvertently pushed him out of the commercial star orbit, even though audiences were attracted precisely by that. Ultimately, Rebel Without a Cause also marked the moment Sal Mineo realized that his talent was ahead of its time. He became a star not by conforming to the system, but by revealing his fragility, a courageous artistic choice, yet one that also heralded a long series of conflicts between him and Hollywood in the years to come. Sal Mineo did not act to make an immediate impression, but rather as if the audience had accidentally encountered the character in a private moment. He often began his roles from a withdrawn state, as if the character had existed before the camera rolled. This created the feeling that Mineo's characters always had a long inner life independent of the film's scenes. Mineo tended to tone down familiar masculine actions, averted gaze, slow gestures, and lowered voice at the end of sentences. This was not a lack of confidence on the part of the actor, but a deliberate choice. He understood that emotional power did not lie in occupying space, but in the ability to make the space heavy when he was silent. Mineo was very sensitive to breathing. In many climactic scenes, he deliberately breathed unevenly, creating the feeling that the character was struggling with an unnamed conflict. This made the audience feel uneasy, even though there was no dialogue to explain it. Unlike many method actors of his time, Sal Mineo did not express extreme emotions, but let them appear through very small cracks. He rarely cried or exploded. Instead, he would have wet eyes, but no tears, or pause too long before responding. This is a style of acting that requires the audience to empathize, not be led. This style made Sal Mineo a difficult actor for studios to use, too subtle for pure villain roles, too fragile for hero roles, and too real for pre-designed star images. But it was precisely this that made him ahead of his time, especially in his portrayal of characters who did not fit gender stereotypes. In retrospect, Sal Mineo's acting style was not intended to be widely liked, but to be seen for what it truly was. It was a courageous artistic choice, but in the context of 1950s to 1960s Hollywood, it was not really welcomed or applauded. Sal Mineo's greatest difficulty did not stem from public scandals, but from Hollywood's silent, exclusionary mechanisms. He was rarely attacked directly. Instead, he faced calls that never came, roles that were under consideration and then vanished. In the studio system, an actor who was no longer mentioned was effectively written off, even if no one stated the reason. Mineo was seen as an image risk rather than a moral issue. Studios feared that his fragility, sensitivity, and elusiveness would make male audiences feel uneasy, thereby affecting box office takings. The prejudice here was not vocal, but took the form of market analysis reports. Sal Mineo also found himself caught in the trap of being an actor ahead of his time. He appeared when Hollywood still needed tough, decisive male role models, while his style and temperament leaned towards emotion and introspection. Instead of being seen as a trailblazer, Mineo was considered deviant for his time. Mineo actively sought to redefine himself, taking on more challenging, even violent roles hoping to break away from his fragile image. But these very efforts were seen as inconsistent, making studios even more wary, believing he was forcing himself to conform. Beyond prejudice, Mineo also faced class and racial bias. As an Italian-American in an era when Hollywood favored Anglo-Saxon imagery, he was often relegated to minor roles that left little impact, rarely seen as the face of the American ideal. Another pressure was the scrutiny of his personal life. Mineo was always aware that a single misinterpreted action could end his career. This constant vigilance kept him in a state of perpetual tension, directly affecting both his career choices and his mental health. Prejudice not only slowed Sal Mineo's career, it also eroded his faith in the system. Mineo understood that he did not fail because of a lack of talent, but because he did not fit the image Hollywood needed. That realization helped him maintain his self-respect, but also distanced him further from the center of power in the industry. Sal Mineo never married, but this was not simply a personal choice. In the context of 1950s to 1960s Hollywood, marriage was not just a private matter, but also a means of image building. Many gay actors, or those suspected of being gay, were encouraged, even pressured to marry to appease public opinion. Mineo refused to take that step, a quiet but confrontational decision against the system. Mineo was very conscious of not using others as a shield for his career. He understood that a staged marriage would cause harm to the woman involved, while also locking him into a lifelong role. This refusal caused him to lose points in the eyes of the studios once again. Instead of marriage, Mineo lived a life of fragmented and secretive relationships. His relationships, whether with men or women, were limited by his fear of being discovered misunderstood or taken advantage of. This created superficial relationships lacking trust and security. Mineo kept his private life and work very separate, not out of professionalism, but out of self-defense. He rarely used his personal life for publicity. In an era where many celebrities use their love lives to maintain their popularity, Mineo's silence is viewed with suspicion. This very secrecy fuels rumors, causing Mineo's private life to be viewed through a lens of suspicion rather than understanding. He falls into a paradox. The more he hides to survive, the more he is seen as having something to hide. Prejudice needs no evidence. It only needs space, and Mineo was forced to live in that space. It was from this experience that Sal Mineo stepped into the position of a wounded pioneer. When writing his letter to David Cassidy, he did not talk about morality, nor did he advise concealment or rebellion. What Mineo tried to convey was a warning that fame can protect you for a moment, but it can also isolate you if you are not mentally prepared for the price you have to pay. The least noticed aspect of the letter is the psychological context of the writer. When Sal Mineo wrote to David Cassidy, he was no longer in the position of a central star, but rather someone who had gone through enough cycles of ups and downs to understand Hollywood's mechanism of elimination. Therefore, the letter did not carry a tone of admiration or affection, but rather the voice of a survivor, sent to someone standing at the very crossroads he himself had once stood. A subtle point is that Mineo does not directly mention sexual orientation, even though this is something everyone implicitly understands. Instead, he talks about image control, the price of being loved, concepts safe enough to exist on paper, but deep enough for the reader to understand what is left unsaid. The letter thus takes the form of an encrypted warning. Mineo does not tell Cassidy what to do, but only points out what will happen if he is not prepared. This is the approach of someone who has learned that direct advice is often ignored, while experiences recounted through metaphor linger longer. Mineo does not position himself as a victim in the letter. He does not recount personal injustices, nor does he mention lost roles or rejected opportunities. This shows that Mineo is not writing to seek recognition or pity, but simply to share what he has learned at great cost. The language in the letter also shows Mineo's deep awareness of the generation gap. He does not use a patronizing tone, but writes as if speaking to a younger version of himself. In his view, Cassidy is simply a younger version of himself that he once was. If we place this letter alongside Mineo's private life, we see that it is not just a message, but the crystallization of an isolated existence. No marriage, no recognized social support, no right to make mistakes publicly. Mineo wrote the letter when he understood that silence could not save everything, but speaking in the right way could help others avoid the wounds he had experienced. Ultimately, the letter's greatest secret lies not in its specific content, but in its very existence. In an industry that encourages competition, Mineo chose to pass on his experience rather than keep it to himself. It was the act of a man who knew his reputation might not be restored, but still wanted to leave a sign for those who came after him that the price of truth is real and no one should pay it alone. In his final years, Sal Mineo found relative freedom on the theater stage, where he controlled his roles and was not overly scrutinized for his personal image. He was gradually regaining his status when he was suddenly murdered in 1976 at the age of 37, a shocking death that left many questions unanswered. Mineo passed away before he could witness the changes in Hollywood, but his legacy is now recognized as a symbol of artists ahead of their time. From the perspective of 2026, Sal Mineo's letter to David Cassidy becomes a timeless warning about the mechanisms of fame. The biggest difference is that this control now operates more subtly through social media algorithms and the expectations of the masses. In the context of 2026, when young artists seem freer than ever to express themselves publicly, Mineo's letter reminds us that freedom of expression does not equate to long-term safety. The pressure no longer comes from closed studios, but from the rapid pace of the digital public. Mineo once warned Cassidy about being loved for an image, then abandoned when that image no longer fits. Today, this repeats at a faster, more brutal pace, with fewer opportunities for recovery. Ultimately, if we place that letter in 2026, we see that Sal Mineo was not only speaking to David Cassidy, but to every young artist entering the media world. The core message is to understand the price of being seen, and not to let external recognition become the sole measure of one's self-worth. The first lesson drawn from Sal Mineo's story is that fame does not equate to protection. When you are popular, everything can be very favorable. But when your image no longer fits the expectations of the public or the system, artists can easily be abandoned. Therefore, if a person relies solely on fame to define their self-worth, they will easily fall into crisis when the attention wanes. The second lesson is that living authentically must be accompanied by awareness. Sal Mineo shows that courage alone is not enough, especially in the entertainment industry. Young people need to understand the context in which they live, understand the risks that may arise, and prepare themselves mentally for them. The important thing is not to hide one's true self, but to know how to protect oneself, to go the distance without being too badly hurt.